Please join me in welcoming Phil for his talk on MEV definitions.
All right, amazing. Start my little stopwatch. What an intro. That makes me feel better about myself. So hi everyone, I'm Phil. That was a pretty good summary of my work in crypto. I work on smart contract security in distributed systems, both in academia and industry. I work on bribery, consensus protocols, and smart contract mechanism design. And this talk today is going to be about MEV, the three letters that have kind of dominated the last 7 years of my life and research. Originally, I was going to give an in-depth mathematical talk about the actual MEV definition, but in talking to a bunch of people last night, I decided to kind of reframe it. I gave a version of this talk that was very much more about the academic progression of MEV, and I'm going to try to do that, but also give you a little bit of my personal journey through MEV while also explaining the definitions. So hopefully it'll be a nice talk about how to start a research meme and campaign and push it through to people and things like that. So we'll cover a few things in this talk. Number one is why are we here? That concerns the past. The other thing is why are you here? Why are you listening to me right now? Why do you care? So that's the present moment. And what do we do next about the MEV problem as a community and as an academic kind of set of people as well as an industry. So let's start with the past. I'm going to kind of detail my journey through MEV. So before I even discovered MEV, it meant this. The energy in MEV is released due to the transformation of 1 kilogram of mass completely into energy. MEV is a measure of energy. E equals mc squared. Who remembers that? And actually, this is kind of a joke, but also kind of relevant, because one way to think of MEV is potential energy in all these financial systems we're building that wants to be expressed as kind of value flowing into the participants of these systems, both miners and validators as well as others. All right, so I'm going to kind of tell you the story of MEV through this very cliched technology adoption curve that we all see in business school textbooks and cringe at frequently, and kind of talk about various work streams and various things I was involved with along my journey, and then kind of cover where we are all as a room and a community today. So my journey in MEV started with this paper called The Hydra, which I started writing in 2016. It was one of the first papers I worked on in grad school. So one of the reasons I went to grad school to study cryptocurrency was, at the time, 2016, it was not clear, what would happen in the future of crypto. There was a lot of uncertainty. I wanted to be able to study it in kind of a rigorous way and also talk to people like regulators and academics and like yourselves and try to see what can we really do here? How can we improve society through this seemingly promising technology? So one of my early campaigns was I was so frustrated by the security research community of everyone just taking their pet technique, their pet model, whatever they were doing before, and just saying okay, let's apply this to smart contracts, let's apply this to these protocols that we're building. And I was frustrated with this because I thought there could be so much more innovation if people kind of did clean slate redesigns considering the new possibilities of these decentralized systems. So this paper, The Hydra, with many, many co-authors, I encourage you to check it out. It talks about how to create a piece of software that has a known economic value to it, that that this software is secure up to $1 million, assuming some very, very simple and empirically quantifiable assumptions, and assuming a purely rational model of the world, essentially, with, again, some 1 or 2 very simple assumptions on top. So this was an example of okay, we can create the first economically rational, secure piece of software ever in production anywhere. That's amazing, right? You don't have that in traditional systems. What is the exploit value of Google? You don't know. And where does MEV come into this? Well, it came in as a fly in the ointment that ended up dominating half of this paper writing process. In the original paper, it's in Appendix D2. But it turns out that this economic game we were building and proving rationally secure doesn't work if anyone in the system has the ability to front-run anyone else. If there's any sort of front-running that can go on where one user can see that another user is about to make a transaction or even infer that a transaction is about to occur statistically and make their own transaction first, that completely breaks our security model and makes these pieces of software we've claimed are rationally secure insecure. So we tried to patch this. It led to a project called libsubmarine, which is actually very similar to some of the commit reveal auction talks we heard earlier in the session. It's a library for doing commit reveal with payments on Ethereum in a way that hides the fact that the original payment is a commitment among the anonymity set of new addresses by basically sending money to a contract address that doesn't exist and then deploying a deterministic contract there later. So that was kind of an early journey into the rabbit hole, and no idea at the time how big it would get. So plodding along in my PhD, I started thinking about all these crypto protocols people were writing and like trying to figure out, is there any merit to these? Do they actually achieve the promises people have set out? That led to this blog post about decentralization in 0x and Ether Delta. And we highlighted several issues with projects in the space in this blog post from an academic perspective that were kind of being swept under the rug in the ICO culture of 2017. So this includes exposure to arbitrage on decentralized exchanges. Users were being exposed to like massive arbitrage transactions that gave them worse execution. Miner front running, so miners ultimately having the privileged position to execute user orders however they choose, as well as abuse by the exchanges themselves. We also created our own MEV bot, one of the first MEV bots before PGAs, before any gas auctions or anything like that, to try to see if this was real or if it was just our imagination reading these papers. And we found about $1 million a year of profit running our own bot. Of course, we only did this for a few weeks. Then we published this article. And within a few days of this article, there were already 20 or 30 competitive bots on these marketplaces. So part of this talk is about the power of incentives. Like, just publishing this article created this kind of explosion of talent, and we quickly became uncompetitive in this industry and decided not to keep investing like teams of engineering resources into playing this game with people who are very, very dedicated and good at it. So that kind of started this whole MEV bot ecosystem. The next piece of this is kind of a lesson for people who think technology matters, which is probably everyone in this room, right? And so I found all these issues in DEXs and was thinking about, okay, how do these issues actually get formalized and how do they affect the rest of these systems? How do they affect consensus incentives? How do they affect all these things like that? And I became pretty convinced that, like, due to the amount of DEX volume on Ethereum specifically, there was a huge incentive to reorder transactions on Ethereum for miners that was actually profitable, like at the time, and also to reorder blocks in order to basically have access to history rewriting attacks. We called these originally time-banded attacks. So this was me at DevCon Prague. I believe that was like 2018 or something like that. Young, bright, doe-eyed PhD student, dressing much less like a deranged hippie. You know, I went to try to kind of warn the community, guys, like, we're not paying attention to this. This is a serious crisis, and like, you know, the research shows that this will happen. It's kind of inevitable. And if you measure the incentives, they're already enough to reorg Ethereum and destabilize the blockchain. At the time, I thought I called these order optimization fees, and kind of inevitably entrenched this ordering meme. So ordering fees are for sure one piece of the puzzle. That being said, MEV is not exclusively about ordering, right? There's other things, other aspects to MEV, for example, censorship, for example, even inclusion, right? Who gets the right to include a transaction first? You could see that as ordering, but like, even if you have an ordering protocol that handles ordering in an abstract way, you still need some process to decide inclusion. So it is a little bit, you know, different than like sandwiching or other kind of classical ordering. So that was kind of the early understanding of MEV. The next step was to kind of formalize all this and do the work, do the research. This is what we're all told as like good PhD students. Go back and prove it to people. So I went and I did this talk, and like the response I was getting is like, that's nice that you have your little bot making $1 million a year, $10 million a year, but this is not a real industry, it's not a real problem, it's very small right now. Or people would say, is this real? This looks really cool, and like kind of throw their whole life into it, and then come back to me in 3 months and be like, yeah, there's just no money here, you know, is this really real? So it's a question of kind of questioning my own intuition on like the way these systems would shape out, and I felt like I had to prove it to myself and everyone else. So that's why I started working on this with a bunch of co-authors. Flashboys 2.0 ended up being a kind of monolithic paper summarizing everything we'd done in this domain. We also deployed a ton of experimental infrastructure, 7 nodes around the world, and a very precise timing backend to measure transactions both in the mempool and as they went into blocks. We documented many of the auctions that people were playing on the chain through gas, as well as formalized them into a game theoretic model that like separately predicted future trends that happened kind of after the paper. We also like did empirical studies measuring the actual market size, talking about like where the profit was going and breakdowns and things like this. So this was intended to be like kind of an irrefutable end-to-end. Okay, like I was doubting myself, is MEV real? This was my, at least for me working on this, I can't speak to my co-authors, was like, let's validate this and kind of make it so that it cannot be refuted in the world. And this is the first place the letters MEV were ever used. Was like, it was actually like 2 weeks before this paper was published that I was having so many conversations about ordering, And I think we were converging on the fact that like this problem actually is more general than ordering, and a different term and a different approach was needed. So this is how MEV was first defined, the original definition of MEV in Flashboys 2.0. The paper says, direct quote, OO fees represent one case of a more general quantifiable value we call minor extractable value, or MEV, which refers to the total amount of ether miners can extract from manipulation of transactions within a given time frame, which may include multiple blocks worth of transactions. So we looked at both like single block, kind of real-time MEV, as well as the incentive for reorgs, which is obviously much greater because you have so many degrees of freedom on how you can manipulate transactions. So this kind of started the meme, and it blew up from there and rapidly like evaded my control and kind of became a real thing. So from this to this, but also back to this in a way. So where do we go from there? So one obvious kind of answer is, okay, let's patch our protocols so this is not a problem anymore, right? If ordering is the problem, if the problem is that ordering is unfair, why don't we create a fair ordering? Why don't we change Byzantine consensus to take into account these more abstract fairness properties that we want? And so there's some work in this domain here, as well as like many other projects. We've heard several of them today. I'm sure we'll hear more later. So the idea behind fair ordering is to come up with some definition of fairness that's then enforced by some protocol or some aspect of the network. This particular definition that's used in this line of work, which is Equitas and Themis, is called gamma batch order fairness. So the idea being that like one possible fair ordering is send order fairness, process transactions in the order they're sent. Because we can't do that, we don't know the order they're sent, that's subjective in a worldwide distributed network, we'll come up with this definition that says that if the majority of nodes receive transaction A before B, then A will come before B in the final order. A bunch of flies in the ointment here. Find me offline. We can deeply discuss this kind of definition, but this is certainly one concept of fairness that's been proposed. That being said, it does not solve MEV. It doesn't say anything about like how arbitrage profits are distributed, how the arbitrage game works, the effect of all these things on users. Fundamentally, I would argue this is a technical solution to an economic problem. That's a little bit controversial. The more diplomatic research answer is I think there's a lot of future work here to prove that these protocols are incentive compatible, which has not been done yet, but is a very promising area of research. Okay, so where do we go next from here? Okay, let's actually formally define MEV. This is a big demand. Like, what are we actually talking about? So this is a paper called Clockwork Finance, which aimed to do a few things. Number one is formally define MEV and the MEV game. Number two is create like a suite of tools that you can use to create models of crypto protocols and analyze their MEV under composition, because MEV is fundamentally about composition, as well as under different states in like a formal, symbolic, kind of rigorous way. So in this paper, we describe this quantity that we call EV of a player, a set of blocks that player is allowed to make, which is in future versions going to be eliminated, and the current state of the world. And we basically define it as the block that maximizes, after execution, the difference in a special account of the player's balance. So basically, how much ETH, how much can a miner increase their balance across a series of blocks, in this case in ETH, or one single reference asset. We assume each chain has a base asset in this definition. And then KMEV can be like the MEV across like a sequence of various blocks. A few interesting aspects of this definition. Number one, it depends on the player, right? So there's a lot of controversy in the definitional arena of MEV about whether to include the player. My belief is you need the player because you need a utility function at the end of the day, and the utility function needs to belong to someone. So that's kind of where this level of abstraction comes in. The state, obviously your degrees of freedom depend on the state of the world, and B is intended to kind of model the mempool, all possible blocks that can be created from this state in the future. Again, slight iterations on this in the next series of definitions, but the core of like what MEV is kind of hasn't changed. And we also provide in this paper kind of a set of tools, like I said, and we measure MEV in various protocols and things like that. All right, so that's taking us kind of up the tech adoption curve of MEV. Now I'm like far from, like it's far from a small community, and it's starting to kind of accelerate. And this is what I consider kind of before we crossed this chasm in the adoption curve and like entered true inevitable mainstream adoption of MEV, which is, I would argue, where we are today. So there are some developments here I want to talk about. I guess the ordering was wrong on the previous slide. The first one is a blog post that I ended up writing called MEV What Do? So at this point, between like fair ordering, Flashboys 2.0 kind of entering discussion, many protocols kind of claiming to solve MEV, many people having their own unique MEV solutions, many people arguing that MEV is like the devil, many people saying MEV is like virtuous, you know, like HFT latency wars or something. Lots of controversy, right? And so I wanted to kind of reflect on, you know, the last like 4 years of the MEV journey and like what I think we need to do from here. So this blog post was split into 2 parts. First, arguing that MEV was fundamental, and then talking about what to do about it. So I can briefly cover why I believe MEV is fundamental to all these systems we're building and will never fully solve it. There's a bonus. If I get through this talk quickly enough, I'll give you a proof that we can never achieve 0 MEV while also having DeFi on any chain. And so that'll be at the end. But the TLDR is number 1 is transcriptability. So we're building systems where we want to distribute trust. In order to distribute trust, we need to be able to measure, right, like what happened. We need to be able to validate what is the state of the world, what are other people's actions on this state. And the way we do that is through cryptographic transcripts, through a cryptographic log or other form of log of actions that occurred in the system that allows us to validate our own kind of position within it. This log inherently creates MEV, because when you have a cryptocurrency, you can also condition bribes on this log. You can say, okay, well, I prefer if this log happens rather than this one, and you prefer whether this log happens to this one, and this inherently will always create MEV in like any system you're operating on. On ETH, you can do this inline in a native smart contract, and we've seen that for many, many protocols. So bonus, well, I'm going to tell you how to actually solve MEV, but you're not going to like it through that. The second thing MEV comes from is interoperability and trust, and also fair ordering to an extent, right? So there are many different blockchains, and there are many different trust models. In my opinion, it's kind of a pipe dream to assume that people will ever share one notion of trust or one notion of fairness or anything like that, right? So we will see many blockchains, we will see many economic zones, we will see many domains. Some will be centralized, some will be extremely decentralized, some will be hybrids, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, with making all various imaginable trade-offs, right? And so anytime you have interoperability across these trust zones, someone has to gate the entrance of new information into each of these zones. And that person becomes able to extract rent, becomes in a privileged position to basically capture MEV and increase their own balance in the system, right? So anytime you have interoperability across trust domains, even if it's 2 different fair ordering protocols, you're creating MEV. It's like a fact. And the third reason MEV is fundamental, and people actually want it as a feature often, is because of the goal of permissionless design. So how do you achieve a permissionless design in crypto? You put money on the table, and you reason that like if there's money on the table, someone will take it. And we've seen that's actually extremely effective in these systems. And so to do that, you have to put money on the table that anyone can take. But who ultimately can take it if there's many people competing for it? It's whoever's in the position of privilege on the network, which is ultimately the miner. So anytime you want a permissionless design pattern, you basically accomplish it through MEV. That's how you get CryptoKitties birthing, Uniswap liquidity provision. It's how you get MakerDAO liquidations. All of these things rely on MEV that's paid to kind of perform desired actions and achieve some equilibrium. So from these 3 things, it's very unlikely we're ever going to eliminate MEV completely. What do we do about it? This is kind of my prescription. If you're a dApp developer, think carefully about this in your system. Limit harmful MEV to your users to what is strictly required for the protocol. Don't overpay miners because that destabilizes the entire network you're running on. If you're users, you should demand that dApp developers do this and like tell you how they're thinking about this in their protocol. If you're an L1 or an L2 developer, you need to design MEV first if you want to have any kind of DeFi, DEX, trading, ordering sensitive applications on your stack. There is no option to like do some protocol first you think is technically cool and think about MEV later in another stage, because you're going to have to redesign everything you've done from a clean slate. Like, this is the economic problem these systems are ultimately should be optimizing to solve. So think about it from day one, basically. If you're a validator, you actually do need to extract MEV. The reason for that being that if you don't, a higher percentage of the MEV, basically what you're leaving on the table, will go to kind of the least regulated and least ethical validators. So having uniform MEV extraction within a system is extremely important for geographical decentralization, for regulatory decentralization, and for all of these different reasons. You don't want to create an environment where you can get super linear returns by behaving in a way that like violates certain norms or laws. that just incentivizes the centralization of your validator set to like shitty people. And everyone else, think about the negative externalities of the systems. So the pressure relief valves of MEV, as I call them. When you design poorly around MEV, what do you see? Gas wars, spam, and latency arbitrage. So think about these negative externalities in your system, whether it's a L1, whether it's a DAP, whatever you're using, or anything like that. OK, so another thing that kind of happened on this journey is many people who were interested in MEV kind of formed a Telegram group at some point. And a bunch of us like hung out in various hacker houses and et cetera, and decided to start a company kind of addressing these three different prongs. So this was announced in a Medium post about the birth of Flashbots, which is a company I am a steward of, and a steward of the MEV meme within. And there are many other stewards as well, so it's a kind of more of a collective structure, but not fully. And it's formed with three goals. Number one is to illuminate the dark forest. So users, developers, L1 designers, they need information. If you look at ecosystems where Flashbots doesn't exist yet, you can see like a clear opacity of MEV. Democratize MEV extraction, give access to MEV even to small validators, even to small players, so that there's not a centralization incentive of needing to vertically integrate an MEV stack in order to be like a profitable ETH validator or anything like that. And distribute the benefits of MEV to the users, to the other protocol participants in a way that is fair for everybody. So I would say we've been very successful so far at the first two. The third one is kind of a work in progress. So a summary of like the last year in Flashbots is we've now seen a rise of professionalized MEV extractors. As a lower bound, we have over $1 billion in MEV captured in 2021, and that is a very, very conservative lower bound. Means MEV is likely already kind of on par with the largest HFT ecosystem that's like ever existed on Wall Street. We see protocol design being stress tested. We see all sorts of protocols breaking down because of MEV issues. Avalanche, Solana, the recent crypto ape auction or whatever. Protocols are breaking all the time because of poor MEV design, including entire networks. And many MEV mitigations are being mitigated and explored by probably hundreds, if not thousands of efforts at this point. One interesting point about Flashbots is, and this is something we also see in several places in the Flash Boys paper, is just like seeing the raw efficiency of economic incentives. So this graph is very interesting. It considers all bids in the Flashbots auction and what percentage of the amount went to the miner. The Flashbots auction is kind of intentionally designed to send as much money to the miner as possible in order to achieve the goals of democratizing MEV. And the searchers are the parties that assume the risk to kind of distribute these rewards to the smaller miners. So you can see when in the early days of Flashbots, like March to May 2021, there's a pretty broad distribution of what percentage of each bid was going to the miner. But over time, this curve kind of shifted harshly to the right, to the point now where almost all the profit in most MEV verticals is going to the validators or to the miners because of the competition in the searcher level of the stack. So Barnaby, who gave the talk with this slide in it, this chart is originally from Luke at Flashbots, said that he thinks this will be in economics textbooks one day, and that was a great honor, and I totally agree. So why are we here? Sorry, I'm like speeding up because I'm like a little bit lagging on time. So 3 things that are happening in the present that I think are good for people in this room who want to follow up and continue engaging and discuss kind of the next steps of MEV now that we've like reached this critical mass, and like a bunch of people here are thinking about it anyway, and like if I go and do nothing, like MEV will survive as a thing. So one thing I want to show to you is MEV Day. MEV Day was a recent event we had about 2 weeks ago in Amsterdam. I gave a kind of variant of this talk as well. It was very much separated into this dystopia, utopia with 2 different stages and like 2 different vibes, 2 different parts of the program. And this is kind of like important. Like I think we are standing at a kind of fork in the road for MEV. I originally became obsessed with it because I thought it would centralize all blockchains to Wall Street, which would kind of take away our only hope of escaping this rent-seeking cabal that's like dominated our entire economy. I think still that potential exists, and it exists through MEV and the vertical integration incentives that MEV provides. There is also a utopia that we can build as technological dreamers where the users receive the benefits of all this, and it does make markets more efficient and better for everyone. I think which world we go towards is not a foregone conclusion, and in many ways depends on like how we engage socially with the next few billion users of our protocols than any technology we build. So just something to think about. here at FC, okay? So this is my picture of what it's like to arrive at FC after like a flight and just like be in this like island with all these like weird crypto people. But you know, it's also like, this is like a light at the end of the like cyberpunk tunnel picture. So this is like the journey part of the slide, I guess. As I said, like at this point, you know, I think I'm very happy to like step back and let MEV exist. But there was definitely like a period of intense disillusionment, you know, giving up hope, like thinking my grad school was like a waste of time and things like that. One of the things I've been talking to a lot of people here about is just like the general academia and peer review and acceptance process. I think that's all something we experience outside this venue very frequently. So I just wanted to say, you know, when people ask me, why did you fly here for one day just to give this talk? It's because I love FC. You know, I've only been here once, but just the fact that there's this venue where we're all on the same page and we're here to like engage with ideas from like a positive default, I think is very special in crypto research. It's a place that needs to exist. And I understand the uphill battle present in the rest of academia. Like I've also been fighting it for close to a decade now. It's very demoralizing sometimes. But you know, this is just my personal soul sharing to say to anyone who's like facing that in their research, even if it's me sitting there and like shitting on your protocol or whatever, like, you know, keep pursuing it because it's definitely valuable, and yeah, it doesn't matter what other people think or say about it. All right, truly I'm almost up on time. This, in my opinion, is the most critical. Oh yeah, one more thing I forgot to show. MEV.day, please go there and watch all the talks. There's like probably 40 or 50 different talks that go deep on every single niche aspect of MEV you can think about, from like DEXs to protocols to finance ecosystem to your batch auctions to whatever you want. So like, if you want to follow up, please do check that out. That's like the #1 takeaway you can have from this entire talk. Okay, cross-chain MEV, that's like a more recent paper I've been involved with that came out of Flashbot's research, more on the industry side, submitted to and rejected from FC, although not submitted to FC DeFi. So, you know, another asterisk on that, but I think a very interesting piece of work. So in this one, it generalizes basically the MEV definition to 2 different domains, I and J, pairwise MEV. And it basically talks about the action space rather than looking at blocks that each player has in each of these different domains. So maximizing the joint action space across both domains so that your expected value of the player in the world state, given that actions, this is in domain I, plus the expected value in domain J for the same thing, times some pricing function, because we need to be able to maximize a single quantity. So you need some notion of pricing between these domains. And that's a flexible pricing function. You can choose any choice of function there. This defines the cross-chain MEV. And why is this important? Because this basically says that there's an incentive to collude across the chain. You can extract and maximize this quantity most efficiently if there's no risk for you for including both actions across both of the domains atomically. If you have some risk, there will be a discount on how efficiently you can extract this max, which means validators that validate across 2 different chains will get more MEV on each chain, more than the sum of the parts, essentially, more than if they were individually validating on each chain. And that is an extremely scary centralization incentive. It also means the bad drives out the good in crypto. Centralized exchanges, centralized blockchains, BSC, Solana, whatever. They will affect and centralize more decentralized systems like ETH as well, because they'll corrupt the ETH validator incentive. So that's kind of what this paper is about. Very urgent, very scary. Talk to me about it after if you're interested. We still don't know what the hell is going on in the centralized world, so this is a call to any finance researchers that understand this shit. Are we really only focusing on DeFi because we can see all of this, right? Look at the size of centralized exchanges, 95 billion daily volume versus Uniswap, 1 billion. 2 orders of magnitude, right? So what are these people doing? How are they manipulating their users? We all know it's happening. Like anyone who's involved in this knows it's happening, right? So FTX, Binance, how are they leveraging their chains? How are they leveraging their centralized exchanges? How do ARBs and rents work in these ecosystems? So what do we do next? We're on the precipice of centralizing all of crypto. We now have a choice. Hopefully everyone in this room is here to do these 2 things and look at themselves in the mirror every day and say, this is my mantra: attain understanding, preserve decentralization. Attain understanding, preserve decentralization. I'm serious, like do it in the mirror. I'm not joking. Or maybe you're here for these reasons. You know, I definitely get that vibe from a lot of people. How do I make as much money as I can? And oh, great, it's going to be centralized. Like I would love to own that shit. You know, give me the pipes. You know. No, I'm not looking anywhere. No, no. That's your own insecurity, you know? Yeah, yeah. So anyway, you know, buy a mirror and like look at this slide, and you can ask yourself like light mode or dark mode, right? Like choose your adventure. But I think this is something we all need to like consider and be deliberate about as a community, because I do think the decentralization of these technologies is extremely important. That's why we're here. It's the DeFi workshop, right? If we centralize all this stuff through MEV, there's no more D in the Phi. It's just the Phi workshop. And no one here would want to come to that, I'm pretty sure. So in my talk in like 2018, these are two of my takeaways. Conclusion, existing DEX designs are inscrutable, as well as while we sit in decadence at conferences, real users are losing money on our systems. Both of these things are still true today, so an open call to revisit these problems. And a personal question for me, is the MEV meme good or bad for all of the rest of the users that are under the rest of that technological adoption curve that don't even know what it means yet and don't understand, like, how will this impact my future financial transactions in the future financial system? So I think largely this is on everyone here to actually work towards decentralization, keep the D in DeFi. And you know, there will be choices of like who to take money from, what protocols to study, where to put your intellectual labor. So like, you know, make a smart choice for everyone else who's not in this room. This is the last slide I have. I'm at my hard stop, so I'm not going to talk about it at all. But if you think you have a zero MEV protocol, you just go ahead and take a cell phone picture of this slide and like get back to me in a few hours, and we can talk about how it's relevant to you. Alrighty, that's all I have. Thank you for listening. Happy to take any questions now about MEV or life or, you know, whatever else, my pants, anything you want. Thank you.